There's nothing new about the idea of sequels, prequels, or spin-offs in TV and film production, but the fundamental question of why they work and what they are designed to do continues to be up for debate. Who knows, if you're a diehard fan of the original, maybe you're even emotionally invested up against these Hollywood giants saying, I could do better. That's not what I imagined in my head. Anyway, the news this week of Daejangkum sequel and the origin story of famed chocolatier Wonka hitting local theaters, we thought it might be a good time to strike up the old discussion. Are sequels ever good? For this, we now connect with Issac Kim. Good morning, Isaac.
Good morning. Let me answer that question. Yes. All right. See you later.
No segment.
Yes, kidding. Yes, kidding.
It's funny. If we had a yes or no answer for a culture segment, would culture be so interesting? I think sometimes it's supposed to be up for debate. Maybe that's half the fun. Do you love it? Do you hate it? But Isaac, because that's a good place to start. When you hear news of any sequels, be it Marvel, be it a TV drama series that you watched as a kid being revamped like decades later, what does your gut reaction tell you? Are you excited or nervous?
I think this is a paradox. Most people in life would think that originals are better than the copy. So maybe that's kind of where the sequel is considered like a copy. But in actuality, it's just another addition, right? It's an add-on to something that exists. So I think most people would agree that sequels, in conversation, will say like, "Oh, sequels are never good as originals." It's always the original. But if you actually look at the data and look at the numbers and look at just history, the sequels tend to obtain like the higher scores from audiences, the bigger paybacks, more profits. And it is a paradox, but if we go into it and you look into like the details, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I think that's a good place to start. The history of sequels and why Hollywood time and time again insist on doing not just one, but sometimes a few, sometimes too many. And it just never dies. There's maybe something we can learn from Hollywood that has been actually reaping the benefits of it too. Yes, go on.
Oh, cool. Well, I was going to say, it's like, what comes first, right? Chicken or the egg? And like, it's like a circle, goes back and forth of like, why are producers doing sequels? To make money, right? But if it was there, like that was the end of it, then it would stop. But when they do it, they actually do make money. And then and why do they make money? Because audiences appreciate it, whether they say it or not, they prove it with their wallets. And so you're making more money, and then the audiences, some critics might complain, but when the audiences are appreciating it and love it, then you get more sequels and more prequels, and you get, like add-ons and it's kind of like a virtuous cycle.
I wonder if we can just coin it like right here on Good Morning Seoul with you, Isaac, right? The sequel paradox, because the conversation we have in day to day is sometimes even demeaning, like, sequels, like who cares for them? But the truth is a lot of people do flock to theaters. A lot of people do watch the second season of a TV show, even if it's experimental, because let's be honest, I think TV series in Korea is relatively new compared to productions over in the United States. But anyway, there was this book that got our attention in our research. Pulitzer winner Walt Hickey explains in his book, You Are What You Watch. How funny is that title? That the primary motivation for a reboot, a sequel, or a prequel is financial. So sometimes it's not always about expanding the story or developing a character. Sometimes it is, or it could be both, but it's about the money. In other words, the goal is to maybe not outdo the success of the original, but just be a safe bet.
Yeah, Hollywood is the business.
We forget sometimes.
A lot of entertainment. It makes us fun. It gives us a good time. We enjoy it. We get attached to it. But it is about making money. And so, that's why some people think of it as like the dream job, right? Like, oh, you get to make fun stuff and do fun things, but at the same time get paid. So, the real reason I think that Walt Hickey explains in that book is definitely a fact. The purpose of Hollywood and it's and long, if you go further in history of like the structure of capitalism is like, you're trying to give people what they want, supply and demand, right? So people demand entertainment, so you give it to them, and then they want more, so you give them more, and then that virtuous cycle. So if you look at the famous works that I was thinking about what could what examples are there of like sequels doing really well, and like let's start with like franchise films, right? Like back in the 80s there was a film called Back to the Future, and like it was a very like well received original film, and like there's so much historical like Hollywood information about the making of that film, but Back to the Future 2 I thought was better than Back to the Future 1.
Oh, I feel like that could be a conversation too, but I agree.
Yes, exactly. And then that led to Back to the Future 3 and, all the other, like the launching of careers and like so many things, when it comes to even theme parks and video games and just all that stuff back then. In Korea, I know a lot of my friends, we love the Dark Knight movie, right? Christopher Nolan is a huge popular director here, but that's the sequel. Like the first movie was like
Dark Knight Rises.
But the Dark Knight movie is a sequel, and like I don't know if you know this, but like my kid, when when I watch movies with my kid, like there's a movie called Paddington Bear, right? Paddington Bear 2 is one of the most critically acclaimed films, up for not only for kids but for families and for just like on an objective critical
Is that the one where he ends up in jail?
I think he always has a kind of run with the police.
Does he really? Okay. Okay.
He kind of, yeah, we don't want to give it away, but yeah, there is a jail. I mean, that movie was, like received better than the first one. And, and it was an expansion of that world,
Actually, because you bring up, movies that are, made for children, but also just for families. I was thinking about the Toy Story franchise, but I mean, granted, like there was a significant time between the creation of those movies, significant, especially between like 3 and 4, right? I mean, an entire lifetime for some like children out there, but one might argue the stories can stand alone even. And maybe there's someone out there that think the sequels are better too.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who enjoyed Toy Story 2 better than Toy Story 1, and like, Frozen 2 versus Frozen 1. Or
I don't know about that.
Terminator, the James Cameron's film Terminator, it came out and it didn't do as, it was very niche when it came out, when Schwarzenegger, took on that role. But Terminator 2 was like a huge blockbuster, and it like, terminated the box office, like literally just took over like Hollywood films for like almost a generation, So I think that the evidence on a critical opinion or a subjective level is there to support the idea that some people actually do like sequels better, or the sequel becomes the introduction to a lot more people for a movie. So sometimes if you're not like a trendsetter or a tastemaker, you might not have a chance to watch every single movie. By the time a sequel comes out and it's popular, then everyone's like, oh yeah, I better go watch that. And then it unlocks this whole new world for audiences. So
which is so fun.
It is, and it's very profitable.
Okay, so it seems like we're touching upon two very different reasons why sequels do well. In some cases, like the Dark Knight story you mentioned, the Toy Story and Paddington Bear, sometimes the second story or the follow-up story is just more compelling. It's almost as if the first is just a setup to tell you about the characters and look at our relationships, and this is a plot. But in the second movie, things get a little bit more complex, like the one with Joker in the Dark Knight film. But there's also the angle of, because there is an attached fan base, there's almost a guarantee that whether you love it or hate it, there might be an attached audience who'd be inclined to go, to rain all over it, or to watch it and love it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the audience is going to be, the reason or the engine for the economics behind the film. The audiences are, the ones that are going to be responsible for the noise about the film, right? Whether it's positive noise, publicity, or negative. So yes, definitely, this idea, when you create a film or a TV series or music or any sort of cultural, artifact and asset, like it really depends on the audience receiving it and how they receive it.
It's funny because I don't think we always mean what we say. You're right to say that, there's a little bit of not shame per se, but hesitation to say out loud things like, I like the movie better than the book. Like that's like a big no-no, right?
Right.
I like the sequel better than the original. I like the remake better than the original. These are sort of like the no, don't touch that. It's always about the original. But then if you go deeper, you start to question what were the originals inspired by? We could go back to Shakespeare. We could go back further. And the question becomes much more complex. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Lion King, right? Like one of my favorite movies recently got, the live action update. But the original animation, like there's so many similarities to Shakespeare's Hamlet. Like you just met Shakespeare. Like, it's like it goes back. There's even a concept of like everything is actually a remix of everything. Like all the stories have been told, and now everyone is just kind of reimagining things that we already know.
There's nothing new under the sun. That could be a divisive one too. But I think it's an interesting conversation to have, a timely one, because we're hearing news of more sequels and prequels. Wonka is in theaters, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But I first want to make a little bit of a stretch of a comparison. There are plenty of sequels in the TV series sector last year in Korea. DP2, Sweet Home, Dokjeon, Believer. The former two are TV shows, and Dokjeon is a film. But they all had a pretty good run with, I think, its respective firsts. But the sequels, it seems, fell a little bit short of expectations. That's kind of the consensus around it. So why didn't these work?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them is comparison, right? Like the success of some of Korea's dramas in the last few years have been so outstanding that they did justify a sequel. But then that sequel didn't actually succeed as to meet the expectations of the original. And in the last couple of years of post-COVID world, like our expectations and our understanding of time even has changed. So it's a very volatile kind of situation. But a lot of critics have mentioned these particular shows like DP2, Sweet Home 2, and a lot of these Netflix shows. There was a lot of expectation, from the sequels kind of meeting or filling the desires of the audiences, but there was a lot of resources put into it as well. So it was like, this is not like they were short of resources to make a sequel. There was plenty of resources given to try to quench the thirst of the audience. But the criticism that I've read from a lot of critics is very interesting to me because they say there's arguments that audiences want something fresh and new, and original. But like statistically, like when we look at it, like if it's the same thing, people will not like it. If it's too different, people will not like it, right? So they're like when DP2, Sweet Home 2, like these Netflix shows, some of the fans, the critics have been saying that, in the second season, it's like they tried too hard to be different, that they lost the fans of the original, if that makes sense.
Do you think just the idea of, seasons for TV series is so new to Korea? We just haven't figured it out yet. How to tell a compelling story, how to keep the original characters intact with a little bit of continuity. So we're very invested in character development, but present something new as far as the plot twists go.
Definitely the concept of a seasonal or like season drama. Most Korean dramas traditionally have been, the successful ones have been the miniseries, right?
Yeah.
The
16 episodes.
16 episodes or 20 episodes, everybody dies at the end. Happy.
Happy.
So, with a very romantic, beautiful, artistic, and wrap it up in a bow, whatever. So there is a lot of, differences in format right now that audiences are getting adjusted to. So I think that the criticism about things going a little bit too differently or trying too hard and trying to be too fresh that you lose people is a very interesting take. I can see why that would make sense. But also there are some people who are saying because the creators are not used to making serialized or episodic seasonal continuing the story. Most people when they're used to making kind of a series that's wrapped up and kind of come to a closure, you're actually asking them, hey, can we open that up again and like make something new? And it's like, okay, you're gonna give me a lot of money, so I'll do that. But maybe that might be something that's not said like traditionally done in Korean, entertainment.
Okay, so maybe we need a little bit of time to acclimate, but I mean, trends change fast. So I suppose we need to get there fast when we have the global audience's attention. Wonka, starring Timothée Chalamet as a young Willy Wonka, hit local theaters this week. It already got a holiday push in North America last December. How well is a spin-off faring at the global box office?
Yeah, recently, big news was that it already hit $500 million, halfway there to the $1 billion, prize. So it was like they said that the budget is like 125 million, and they've already hit the 500 million. They've recouped everything in the States and like over 300 million globally. So I mean, it's a success. And so whether or not you can say, is there going to be a sequel? It is a sequel, right? Wonka is like a sequel in a sense that it's an adaptation. It's a reboot. It's, I haven't seen the film yet, so I don't know exactly the plot, but there's going to be differences in the plot with the original story. But this, the story of Wonka, which is, it's a very popular kids
children's book.
Story.
You're right, by Ronald Dahl, and it's one of the inspired stories. It's an origin story, I think, for Willy Wonka. Coming of age, figuring out what he wants to do, create this monstrous factory for chocolates.
Well, I mean, and like Koreans audiences seem to love it. I heard like last week it was like almost 60% of the audience went to see Wonka, in Korea.
This week,
so,
yeah.
It was, it's huge. So,
I mean, not to play the devil's advocate, but there's just not a lot of films to watch in theaters right now. But Wonka is kind of a major one. So how about that? It has our attention, to say the least. It just looks fun. I need a fun movie every now and then.
Yeah, no, a fun movie, and there's not much competition, and it's like it's there. I mean, that's like the perfect formula to recoup all your money
to be a box office hit. So thank you so much, Isaac, for today's talks. We'll speak to you again soon.
All right, have a good one.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.